Well, welcome back to the One Big Thing podcast with Steve Campbell. Folks, this is episode number 3. I have been blown away at the feedback that I've received from many of you that have listened to episodes 1 and 2, with episode 1, my wife, episode 2 with my dear friend Rachel, where she talked about our identity and where it comes from, and we are not what we do. Many of you have reached out to me and said that you've made the One Big Thing a part of your life's journey. To let you know, this is available on every major podcast platform, but we're also on YouTube at NQR Media, so you can watch these conversations as they come out. And I've heard from many of you that you make it a part of your nightly routine. So I could not be more blessed and thankful that you guys have reached out to me and let you know how much this has impacted you. And that's the whole goal of the One Big Thing, is not just to bring you amazing guests like you're going to hear from today, but to actually get real practical insights from these guests that you can apply to your life if you see fit. If it doesn't fit, that's okay too. But I am very excited about my guest today. We episode number 3 is going to feature Bret Magpiong, and I'm going to give him a little bit of space to introduce himself here at the beginning so that you guys can be just as excited I am to hear from somebody who's made a tremendous impact on my life. So Bret, welcome to the One Big Thing. Why don't you give us a little background as to who you are as a person?
Steve, it is so great to be with you. I think the last time we saw each other was several years ago at a Schwab Impact meeting. You came up to me afterwards after I'd been on a panel and said a couple nice things to me. So I really appreciate that we've been able to hook up here. Yeah, I'm Bret Magpiong. I am a retired executive and wealth manager, but most importantly, I'm a father, a husband, and a writer. I recently wrote a book and published it, self-published it. It's called The Delta Theorem. I've been married for 30 plus years. I live in Southern California, and, I'm just excited to be part of this one thing, the one big thing. And really today, the one big thing is to be able to speak with you, Steve. So it's really great to be here.
Well, and to give a little bit of a backstory, when I launched the One Big Thing, I had no idea who's ever going to want to come on this show, who's going to want to be a guest. And you start thinking about all the people that you've crossed paths with over the years and who's made an impact on you. And in 2019, as you said, you and I had the chance to meet in San Diego, California. I'm an East Coast boy. It was my first time being out on the West Coast. I went for a work event and found myself being in a workshop that you were one of the 3 main panelists. I didn't even know why I was going into that room. It was packed, Bret. There was 300-400 people in there. And I thought this must be a popular segment. And you were one of the 3 speakers. And obviously I don't shy away that faith is the biggest part of my life. And as you spoke, there was 2 other speakers, but as you spoke, my heart just felt connected to you in a way that I just felt this stirring inside that when this is over, go wait in line and go introduce yourself and at least say hello. So I think I waited through 40, 50 people that all wanted to speak to you because of your acumen, what you've learned, what you were willing to share. You're top notch. And I was in the back of the line, just a humble younger guy that wanted a chance to say hello. And who would have known couple years later that you'd be a guest on my show? But there's a real thing that I believe is divine appointments. And I believe that this today is a divine conversation that really stemmed from, as Rachel and I kind of talked about, sometimes you don't know why you're in the rooms you're in or where you're going, but many times there are people along your path that you're going to meet that you have no idea that are going to help you. So you gave us the really high level overview. You mentioned a number of things in there, a book, and to give you a little bit of just accolades, it's become a #1 Amazon bestseller. So I want to give you the space to just kind of dig a little bit deeper into who you are as a person and kind of how we got to where we are today.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. Listen, I grew up in Southern California, middle class, neighborhood. The first test I ever failed as a kid, to give you a little bit of a flavor of this, was I was asked to name the 4 seasons. And I said football, basketball, baseball, and hockey, because in my family, those were the only seasons that I knew. I didn't even know what winter, spring, summer, or fall were, especially here in Southern California. We only have, it seems like, a summer and spring. But, my youth was filled with a lot of sports, a lot of athletics, all the way up actually through college even, where I did not play a collegiate sport. I played a club sport called rugby in college. I went to a school in San Luis Obispo, Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. It was a great experience there. After school, I graduated and I moved back to Southern California. Started with a very large professional services firm as my first job. I think I had probably 3 nickels to my name. I had 1 suit. I bought 3 shirts and 2 ties and a couple pairs of shoes. And, each day I would go and just change the tie and the shirt. And that's how I basically got through my first 6 months before I could make any kind of money, and was exposed to some really great situations at this firm, just top notch people, colleagues, clients. It was just really fantastic and was really the launching pad for my career. Shortly after I joined the firm, I met my wife. We actually met at a church service. She thought I was a pompous jock. She wasn't all that far off based on what I told you about my upbringing. But we ended up spending a lot of time together and just getting to know each other. And it's interesting how, they say that opposites attract, and we certainly have been opposites in many different ways. But after 30 plus years of marriage, it's been really a terrific journey with my wife and best friend. In the probably the first 8 years of that, it was what I would call coupleness and in loveness, and that soon changed to familyness because we adopted our daughter Brooke, who's now 25 years old. She's our only child, but she is definitely a gift from God. It was you said a divine appointment, and this was a divine delivery for us. And she's been just absolutely the joy of our life and what have you. As it pertains to my career, I was with professional services firms, and what I ended up in a very unique niche that was serving the ultra high net worth. And these are folks of what I would describe as the less than 1%ers. If there's the 1%ers, then these folks truly are the less than 1%ers, multi generations of wealth. And that's where I ended up, serving them in different capacities, whether it be for them personally inside of what's called a family office or in a multi-family office situation. The last of which, from where I retired, was a national firm that, we had $15 billion of assets under management. We had, 2,500 clients, not all of them the ultra high net worth. We had a segment that was the ultra high net worth. And that was the panel that I was actually asked to talk on, was, how do we deal with family offices and, what do you do in that particular niche? I served there and retired in 2021 for the purpose of really giving back. I'd read a book many years ago. It was called Halftime. And it was written by Bob Buford, and he talks about how, that life has 2 halves to it. And the first half is geared towards success, if you will. And the second half that he was suggesting is to have it be geared towards significance. And his kind of, his push on significance was basically giving back. And so, I'm a relatively young man, not as young as I once was, but a relatively young man, and have a lot of experience and really wanted to, give back. Thus, the writing of the Delta Theorem and, what I'm doing now with coaching and speaking and doing podcasting like this. So, yeah, it's been a great and full life for me, for sure.
Well, so you have a lot of listeners. Most of our listeners to the One Big Thing find themselves in their 30s and 40s. We have everyone from singles to young married couples to families with young kids and everybody in between. You're going to be our first guest on the show that is kind of years ahead of us, sharing wisdom backwards, where our first 2 guests, my wife and Rachel, were really in the thick of it with us, kind of sharing, here's how I'm surviving, here's how I'm trying to thrive. But as you talked about this concept of a family office, again, somebody that works in the financial planning space, I now know what that means. But when I was in San Diego, I don't know if I ever told you this story, when you show up to the conference, they give you a list of all the upcoming workshops that you can attend. And obviously, one stick out to you. And at the bottom, I saw this thing called the family office. And I know a lot about our industry, but that was the first time as an East Coast kid I had heard of a family office. And this is how humble or ignorant I am. I thought, who wouldn't want to work in a family office? That's fantastic. So I signed up for this workshop to only find 300 to 400 other people that were also interested in working in a family style office. I thought, this is great. The future of America is bright. We all want to be part of something together. And when they introduced the very first speaker on the panel with you and they said, describe your average client, and they said they have 50 to $100 million, I thought, I'm not in the right room at this point. And then you spoke, and it was fascinating to me that, again, you had shared a little bit of your story with starting your career with 3 shirts, 1 suit, couple nickels to your name. And I think a lot of us in our 30s and 40s, no one would have batted an eye if I would have got up at the beginning of that talk and thought, I don't belong here. I really don't fit the cut of what this room is trying to do. But I'm a student. I'm hungry for information. And I thought, what's the worst that can happen? I'm going to learn something. And who would have known this connection would have come through it? So I think what I'm excited about as we jump into this book and where you are today as a leader, as a consultant, what you've learned over the years, when you put a billion next to a name, there's many young people listening to this that are trying to make their money work. They're trying to make their kids play sports. And so to hear somebody, I think what you're going to do a really nice job is sharing those real life practical insights of what you've learned in the process. But you started it by saying, you were in a similar position that many of our listeners are going to find themselves in, maybe in positions where I don't know if I belong here, if only anybody knew the car I drove in or what my closet looks like. And yet many of us young people are thrust into either positions of leadership where people are depending upon us. And many times that's what Rachel talked about. We don't even know who we are as people, let alone all the roles and responsibilities. So I think that context is helpful for people to understand that you know your stuff. And I've known you for the past few years, so I can speak to that. But I think talking about the Delta Theorem and kind of where this concept came from, do you kind of want to share what the original intent or vision was behind the book and maybe what you've learned since its release that maybe you didn't even realize was going to be an outcome?
Yeah. Listen, all of those things that you just described and that your listeners are maybe experiencing right now, I experienced those myself. They ended up being a tremendous asset for me in what I did do, because what I found was that more times than not in working with these clients, there was this intimidation factor that they would kind of experience of others towards them. And I didn't really have that. I was simply who I was. I know Rachel did talk about identity. I knew who I was. I was, a kid who grew up with practically nothing. Not really, but, just not as much as what I was experiencing, and had just a down to earth. And I say this with all humility, a down to earth kind of sensibility about myself. Here's what the Delta Theorem really kind of like spawned off of that. It was really 2 paths that happened for me. One was in working with these clients, because what I found in working with these clients, that while they came to me or us for wealth management that we usually associate with the investment side of things, always what ended up happening with clients is that we would start talking about other areas of wealth. And what I mean by that is that there are areas like relational wealth. And where that would come up to play is they would ask me questions like, what did I think the money was going to do to their kids? And how could we figure out what to do about that? Or there were things like mental health or wealth. They would say, I wish I had a peace of mind around some of these things. Or there was physical wealth. And it would be like, I'm not in that great of health right now. Or there's the wealth of time, that they just didn't feel like their time was their own. And so in working with them, I came to realize that a wealth manager was much more than just the financial wealth. It was
Yeah.
all the aspects of wealth. It was relational, financial, health, time, all of those things that were a component of wealth. Then I looked at my own life, and my life was very similar. I felt like I didn't have the same financial wealth, but they were still the same questions that I had. And what would happen to me is that, probably like some of the folks that are listening right now, is that they find themselves like I did, driving to work one morning or every morning, stuck on a freeway in traffic, kind of sighing a little bit of a sigh, like, really? This is it? I mean, my life feels very large. I have a wife, I have a daughter, I have a career, I've got a dog, I've got a car, I got a house. But man, it feels like this is a much larger story that is out there. And what I found was that for me personally, as well as the same things that I felt like my clients, who you would think were part of that larger story, were still feeling like there's got to be more here.
Yeah.
That was really where the Delta Theorem came to be. I started to look at, all right, what are the things that really make you feel like you are tapped into this much larger story? Now, for you and I think that it's pretty safe to say that we understand that that larger story is divine in nature, that God, in fact, has a much larger story that's going on and that we are playing a part in. I think you probably sensed that that's what I was saying up on that panel when I was speaking, in ways that I wouldn't just be flat out stating it like that, but still it was that sensibility that I would bring to the table. I just wanted to take all the things that I had learned, both for myself, in reading, in various things, and put it into a way that can help people to tap into that larger story. And what I like to say is come alive, because at the end of the day, it's about coming alive. Man, I remember a very, very important quote that I heard one time. It said, it's from Howard Thurman, and he said this: don't ask what the world needs. Ask what makes you come alive and do that. Because what the world needs is more people who are really alive. I love that. Now, it's dangerous as well, because we've been told, follow your passion, and that passion feels like it's come alive, and it can take you into places that it's taken me that's like not the right path. But I'll give you an example of what I hear when I hear your first two episodes. I hear you coming alive inside this podcast. I dig that.
Yeah.
I wanted that to be the case in terms of like what I could help people tap into. And there's what the Delta Theorem is all about.
Well, and I'm thinking about a couple of things that you have mentioned that I want to get into the Delta Theorem here in a minute, but just even backing up from what you said, I think what a lot of people my age are struggling with is this idea of seasons in life. And life will be easier when XYZ, you fill in the blank. When I have more money, when my kids are older, when we have a bigger house, when my career takes off, when I get promoted. And what you've alluded to in this story is that even the ultra high net worth that many of us probably could never identify with what they're going through as a human, the experience is very the same, the questions inside. And I think what's hard for some of us is there's expectations that are put on you from society, from culture, from even your family, parents that expect you to be at a certain place through the way they ask you questions, through the way you see things of where your life should be. And it's always a constant measuring stick. And what I love about I had no idea where Rachel was going to go in episode 2. Without episode 2, episode 3 makes no sense because Rachel talked about identity. And if you don't know who you are, or you've unfortunately allowed a circumstance or people to speak things over you that aren't actually rooted in who you are as a person, then you can never break free from that. So there may be people coming out of the last episode, and if you didn't listen, go back. Rachel did a masterful job of being vulnerable and explaining how she had figured her identity was in what she did or the labels that she had. But she helped listeners kind of break free from that and say, no, that thought pattern stops here today because who am I? You can't now begin to live on purpose in this episode if you don't first establish the root of your identity and who you are as a person. So for a lot of the young people and listeners to this show, I think the challenging thing is you get a chance to choose your hard right now. Parenting is really hard. Going to work every day is hard. Having friendships is hard. And it's almost like we've taught ourselves to believe that there will be seasons in life where things won't be hard anymore. And that's when we know we've arrived. But I think what you're going to talk about in the Delta Theorem, and I had heard this one time in a song that I heard, where he said, just because you're breathing doesn't mean you're alive. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that there's a lot of people out there today that have a heartbeat, they have breath in their lungs, they have all the things on paper that you spoke about, maybe a marriage, they have healthy kids, they have a school, that their kids go to, that they live in a community that they love. But at the end of the day, when they're in the car, they're by themselves, something still feels like it's missing. And so, again, in part of getting to know you and looking into the book and the Delta Theorem, I think this conversation is going to help, that this is the starting point. We all have these insecurities. We all have these doubts, but some of us have this thought that there's got to be more to life than maybe what I'm experiencing. And if you're being honest, there are probably things within yourself that the world will throw circumstances at you all the time, things beyond your control. We're not talking about that, but we're talking about, I think, what you're going to break down into the vision behind this book, which is how do I come alive, Bret? What's a starting point for me? Because just to hear "come alive," I love that. Let's come alive. But what does that actually look like in the life of somebody as a coach, as a consultant, that you walk people through?
Yeah. So thank you. That is exactly what the Delta Theorem is intended to be all about. So let me just go through the Delta Theorem. It's like the Delta Theorem. What is that? It is literally a math equation, and I'll go through it with you. Don't be intimidated. People think, oh gosh, I'm bad at math. No. Just go with me on this. So here's what the Delta Theorem is. It's alpha over p cubed by E f squared equals delta. Again, stick with me on this one, because here's what it all means. Alpha is the first letter in the Greek alphabet. And in this theorem or framework, it represents your primary purpose, your one thing, your reason for being, what the Japanese called ikigai. It sits on a foundation, which is p cubed, which represents your priorities, your principles, and your passion. So just think about this for a second. When I'm coaching somebody, I walk up to them and I say, hey, listen, tell me what your purpose is. And this is what I get. I have no idea. It's too big of a question. And by the way, if I tell you what it is, does that mean it can never change? I don't like that optionality being taken away from me. But if I say to them something like this, tell me what your priorities are. Here's what you just talked about, Steve. You talked about life stages. Well, I'm married, or I'm single. I have a career, or I'm in school. I'm retired, or you name it. I have kids. Those are all life stages that say something about your priorities. So you can start to talk about what your priorities are at this stage of life.
Yeah.
If I say to you, tell me what your principles are. Well, let your yes be yes and your no be no, or I will not steal, or, and where did they come from? What are these things that are the non-negotiables in your life? More times than not, people have not written them down, but they have them. And they are the standard by which are foundational for how you live, or at least they should be. And then finally, if I say to them, tell me what makes you just your hair on fire. What in any situation do you just love? That's passion. And so they can tell me those things. Now think about that. Priorities, principles, and passion. What I realized was that if I started with those things in my own life, or even with my clients, which I did, and started with what are their priorities? What do they stand for? What do they want to do in the future? That suddenly their purpose started to unveil itself. And that's where I start with people. And that's what I encourage people to do. Look at your priorities, look at your principles, look at your passion, then kind of see how they overlap. If they're incongruent with each other, then it's not likely your purpose. to be able to be unveiled inside of that particular thing. So that's all the alpha, which is purpose, over P cubed part of the equation. I'll pause there and see if you have any thoughts, because then we'll continue on with the second part, which is really critical inside of the Delta Theorem.
Well, I think that's really the big thing, right? For all of us as people, there's the high level visionary, like, I want to live my life on purpose. And then sometimes your kids walk into the room and disrupt your chain of thought, or you have things you have to go do. So you have moments of your gut, your heart, your faith telling you, what am I designed for? I have to live on purpose for a purpose, which is great. But then a disruption happens and you don't
Right.
ever have the mental space to actually work through what does it actually mean. And it's so lofty. I think what you just did for listeners is to really just think about those underlying foundational parts as a starting point. Like Rachel talked about in episode 2, begin when you think about your identity to journal what adjectives to describe you come to mind. And if
Right.
they're not in alignment with who you are, that's a real practical thing you can do, which most people have never done, which is sit down with a cup of coffee, what have you, cup of tea, and write some of these things down. So to me, that makes sense because it's a practical small step that builds upon each other to get to the larger framework. But I think without these last few that you're going to share, this is what then throws kind of gasoline into kind of where we're going to go.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Listen, I mean, the importance of purpose can't be understated. It just can't be. I mean, and I know that it sounds like aspirational and what have you, but this is why it's so important. Because when that child comes in and disrupts something, or when you're trying to do a workout because you're feeling like your health is not that great, if you don't have a very powerful why, if you don't know why you're doing something, the likelihood of not pursuing or quitting is higher. So doing the work up front of understanding what your powerful why is really, really critical. Now, for me, it's to inspire people to come alive. That's my why right now. That's my alpha. That's my one thing. That's what I want to try to do, is inspire people to come alive, because when they come alive, what happens is that they make a difference. And when they make a difference, they create value. And when you create value, you create wealth. Now, it's financial. It's worked in my career. When I was a value creator, I created financial wealth, but I also created the other forms of wealth, relational wealth and time wealth and those health wealth, those kinds of things. So starting with coming alive and your powerful why is why I think that's so critical. But here's the deal. Okay. All that aspirational. And even for me, aspirational sounds great. Put it in a nice little plaque, stick it up on my, in front of my desk, look at it every single day. But guess what? Nothing happens without E, which is alpha over P cubed by E, supercharged by effort. You have to do something. You got to make something happen here. And so that's where things like, training plans, or having a coach that can help you, or just having something that is going to activate your purpose in ways that, really kind of matter is critical. And then the last part is F squared. What I realized was that if I just stopped with purpose and effort, there was a component that in my life was missing, and that's failure. Because inevitably, inside my effort and even inside my best of intentions, oftentimes there was some form of failure. But here's the only place where math comes up in this whole equation, because so far none of it is math. It's just a framework. That when we look at failure, we normally look at failure as a negative. I did. But in math, when you square a negative, it becomes a positive. I don't understand it. I don't know how -2 times -2 equals +4. It doesn't make any sense to me whatsoever. But what I have learned is that when I square up my failures by learning from them, then that is tremendous value for me inside of where I want to go with my life, how I'm going to make a difference, how do I come alive, those kinds of things. So alpha over P cubed by E F squared all that equals delta, which is the name of the theorem, because delta is the symbol for change, for making a difference, for impact. So the whole concept behind the book is simply this. I believe, like Viktor Frankl did when he wrote about it in Man's Search for Meaning, that a critical thing that we want to know is that our life has meaning. And that's why I felt like that sigh on that 405 freeway, or why my clients felt like this is it as well, that it is this desire for meaning. And so this framework is a way to help us put ourselves in the best position to where we can make an impact, make a difference, have change in our life. Now, I notice that I said the best position. There's no guarantees. Let me tell you what happened to my daughter. My daughter was graduated from college, had a job lined up in Boston at a very prestigious hotel that she had done an internship in. It was March of 2020 and COVID hit. She was going to start her job in June of 2020. And she came home. She was on the East Coast. She came home, finished out the rest of her year, and they closed the hotel and rescinded her job offer. And she was now at home, finishing school, not able to walk through graduation, and didn't know what she was going to do. That's hard. She knew what like her purpose, at least at the age of 23 was, she thought, but that was really, really difficult. But what we encouraged her to do is to just kind of continue to explore. And what she decided to do was, well, I'll apply to some grad schools. And she did. She applied to some grad schools, but she didn't hear back for a while. And I got to tell you that her countenance just was hard. She was challenged. She was emotionally, like, it was just hard. And then one day, middle of summer 2020, she comes walking out of her room with a big smile on her face and a letter in her hand. And the letter was an acceptance letter to an Ivy League school for a master's program in her particular, field of business. And here's what I said to her: Brooke, never forget. And then the letter came. Like your listeners that are talking about, I just don't know. And then the letter came. I've experienced the letter coming for my own life and for her life. And the question is, are we putting ourselves in a position to be able to receive that letter in the best way? That's what the Delta Theorem is really intended to do, is to put us in a position to be able to receive those letters and to move on with what we really want to do with our life and the meaning and creating value.
In the components of the Delta Theorem too, even just that idea of F squared being failure, failure is something in society that we don't always do a great job of talking about or talking through. Life is meant to make mistakes. It's meant to try things. It's meant to try things as parents. It's meant to try things in your career. Just because it didn't work out, we always, at least in my life, I try to think why something didn't work out and how it could be better. And I've noticed personally that some of my greatest advancements in life came from the things that didn't work out. Usually achievement is hard because it's such a place of comfort that we just move on because it worked the way it was supposed to. But when something doesn't go right, a relationship falls apart, we didn't get the job, there's failures, we would deem it. I think that's where kind of those crisis moments come in, where we begin to think about ourselves and we're not worthy enough, or we're not this and that. And if you're a listener and you've experienced failure in your life, you have Bret, who's basically trying to let you know that's a part of the journey and that's what makes you who you are. And that's how you make a difference. Some of my greatest failures in life have now become really the platform that allows me to connect with listeners in a real way, because I've learned empathy. I've gone through things myself. I know now when people say things, yeah, me too, I've been there. And all of a sudden you're more connected to human beings in a way. And it's more our failures that bring us together than our achievements, because you're going to have a listener who cannot identify, the cool thing about this show is in the intro, you hear I have people from all walks of life. I
Yeah.
mean, you are an Amazon bestseller. You had a prolific career. You're doing incredible things. And to the stay-at-home mom or the person who's early in their career, they might go, I mean, I don't really resonate with what Bret's saying, but what you're talking about with failure as a human, we can all say, wow, it's good to know even somebody of his stature in what he's gone through can admit that there's been things that have made him who he is and shaped it. And one of the things you talked about with effort, as I was listening, a pastor once said, you can believe God for the impossible. You can believe God for miracles. You can believe God for provision in the form of a job. But if you're not willing to go out and look for a job, God can't bless what you're not willing to
Yeah.
do. And I think sometimes that's what we tell ourselves, things in our head that make us feel good. But if we're being honest, when you take that E for effort in the middle of this equation, the first part, with the principles and the passions and the priorities, I think we kind of get that, but it's the effort where I think most people stop, or if they're being honest with themselves, they're not doing the things or putting themselves in position that can make the letter come. They're hoping it comes, but if you're not going out and doing those things, knowing that failure is probably going to happen along the way, it creates a totally different frame of reference and gives people permission to know that you need to not only figure out the first part, but then be willing to go into the room, the break room, or like I did in San Diego, not knowing what you were going to get, and look what came from it. So, I mean, even just in what you've gone through with talking about this Delta theorem and coming alive on purpose, what are some other kind of areas that as you started this process, or the practicality of it, that, somebody can even kind of further, okay, how do I, like, is it just really sitting down and starting and writing these things out? Or what would be, obviously, I'm going to put in the show notes a copy link for your book. I would encourage all of you guys to go out and get a copy of it. I think this will be kind of a starter conversation to what the book will get into. But what are some of those other areas, either personally in your life or through writing this book, that has, I think, really inspired you?
Yeah, let me touch on something before I get to that, and that is, in writing about purpose, I came to also recognize that it's really easy to talk about purpose and these kinds of things when you're at what I'll call the higher levels of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which are pretty basic things that have been talked about. Like, there's at the lowest level is just, the needs of physiological needs, like just food, right? Or the next level of safety. I mean, it's almost cruel to talk about purpose if you don't really acknowledge that there are some people who are they're just trying to stay afloat. I mean,
Yeah.
they're just trying to stay afloat. And and I even address this in the book that, like, hey, if you're in those lowest level of needs, you're probably not thinking about purpose and powerful whys at that time, because you're just trying to survive. Now, as you move up in his hierarchy of needs, things about love and belonging, or esteem, or, self-actualization, these are all things that more likely tie in there. So I just wanted to make sure that, nobody's thinking, well, that sounds great, but you don't even know my situation here. No, 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 no. We've been there. I mean, I remember being in line with my mom at grocery stores, and she was using food stamps. I mean, she was embarrassed as you couldn't imagine. And I remember that. Now, I was just a kid, but to talk to my mom about purpose at that point in time would have been almost cruel. So I just want to make sure that we understand, like, that's, components of things, and just being empathetic around that kind of thing. To talk about what, something that's important inside of effort is, this is what I have also learned, is that oftentimes what we do is we try to run when we try to do something. And what I mean by that is that we just start off and we start to sprint. And then invariably what happens is that we fail because we're sprinting. Instead, think about it from the standpoint of crawl, walk, run. The first step is just crawl. I mean, the crawl can be, in this particular case, buy the book. That's an example. That's a crawl step, buying the book. Now, it may sit on your nightstand forever, but Just that act of doing something, or getting some sneakers, lacing up your shoelaces. These are just crawl acts. Instead, let's put ourselves in a position where we're not failing, because listen, I want to inspire aliveness. And what I'd love to do is I'd love to do a TED Talk. And if that's what I thought that I could do, and I'm just going to go out and sprint and try to do a TED Talk, guess what's going to happen? It's not going to happen for me. So refine your craft, start with crawl, then learn to walk, and then learn to run. These are things that help us to be able to do stuff. Let's think about it like this. I share this with my clients that are, I'm coaching. Think of a thermometer, 1 through 10. 10 is sprinting, but crawling is 1 to 3. 1 to 3 on a thermometer. If I got to 2, which is not hard, I'm 66% of the way to my goal. That is a huge success. So make your success in small micro goals, like crawling is to get to 3. Because once you get to 3, I'll guarantee you're going to be pushing yourself to get to 4, 5, 6, 7, which is walk. And now you're prepared to get to 8, 9, 10, which is the sprint. Let's help ourselves inside of these things. Let's not go out there and just try to do stuff that is just bound to fail inside of stuff. Take small micro goals, and crawl, walk, run is what I suggest to people.
Well, and to every young parent that's out there, just the visualization when you got young kids, you know the maturation of an actual child or a baby, that they start on their stomachs and they work their way. But even if you struggle to understand what Bret's talking about, if you get to 3 to 4, of course you're going to take off. It happens with your own kids, is they learn to basically strengthen themselves or buoy themselves up against a coffee table. That then turns to them letting go and go to the couch. And the next thing you know, they don't want to be sitting still anymore, because your body starts to realize I could possibly do more. I think God's designed us to be the same way. He never shows us the entire picture of where our life is going to go. And sometimes we wish he would, but it would cripple us if we knew of all of the impending failures or things that was going to happen. And so I think the hard part is you can start to understand, man, I come most alive when I do this. Mm-hmm. But maybe you found yourself sprinting out the gate the first few times to only get exhausted and say, maybe I'm not what I thought I was. But that even frame of reference to help people understand, what are the actionable effort points that you can start to do that are going to be slower to go, that help you refine your craft as you go? Because there really is a thing of momentum in life. That there's a book that I'm reading right now with some of my business partners that looks at the background of a gentleman in business who is involved in some of the greatest breakthroughs in technology. And many of those companies failed along the way. And then, he talked about versions 1, versions 2, versions 3, bringing them to market and how it got better and better. And I think sometimes we assume that even from a high level in Amazon, a Google, a Facebook, they've always been what they are today. Many of those companies, starting off, had years of failure, not knowing if they were going to make it. People that you see today in the media or that seem successful seem like they've always been that way. Actors in Hollywood. And I know you've had a little bit of background being out in California, but in hearing people's stories, we assume many times when we're in a situation that when we are experiencing the life of somebody else through our own lens, that their life has always been as good as it seems. And we kind of compare it to our own life. So just even you acknowledging as a coach, as a consultant, that you have to tell people to slow down and not sprint. We understand that you want to change and you're tired of being tired and you want to be healthier, you want to be in a better financial positions, but we can go from where we are today to sprinting out the gate and wanting to do it all in one time. And that's inevitably what leads to failure, because our bodies, our minds, our spirits can't keep up with that amount of change because of what you kind of have to learn in the process.
Yeah, that's right. Listen, one of the things about the book that publisher is like, we'll put it in a category. What categories, is this self-help and what have you? And listen, self-help, really, and I'm not saying like that's not the category. No, none of these books should be self-help. It should be relational. This framework is really great in the hands of a coach working with somebody. You go it alone, it's really, really hard. There were reasons why clients hired me and us because they didn't want to go it alone. They could have done it themselves, but they wanted somebody to walk beside them. So this is a really critical thing. It's also great in the hands of a parent. I mean, these concepts that you can share. In fact, listen, I wrote this book for my daughter. Literally, I wrote it so that she could be in the best position to have meaning in her life. That after all the years that I had seen of various things, that I wanted to share with her just some ideas of what I could see. That's relational. And I walked through these things with her, around that. So no, not self-help. Like together, us helping each other is critical. Your podcast, great example of that. That's like you reaching out and helping others, inside of this. It's not self-help. When we go back and we just become these independent people, then invariably we don't follow through. That's kind of what my experience has been in my own life, as well as with, clients that have tried to do it on their own.
Well, and two, I know we didn't really talk about this leading into it, so we can, back up. But um, we're many layers of things. At the root level, we're all individuals. If you found in a situation with your wife, with my wife, you fell in love, you married somebody, you now add a second layer of doing life with somebody. So at your
Mm-hmm.
root level, you're an individual person, individual emotions, mindsets, but then you get married and you kind of have to do life together. With each child that you bring into the world, you're now adding another layer as a parent on top of that. And so I can imagine that maybe there's a listener who's in their car or streaming this episode online. Maybe they're all jazzed up, fired up. They want to sprint, but you just told them to slow down. So they're willing to slow down, but they want what you're talking about. They want to come on alive with purpose, but they can't do it by themselves because they're married. And maybe their spouse didn't listen to this episode.
Mm.
And so I think what I've even experienced, with my wife and I personally is one or both of you can get some resource that can inspire you. But when you're not an individual person and there's other people that are counting on you, I can imagine that if I'm very excited about the Delta Theorem and getting my life right, but my wife hasn't heard what you're talking about,
Yeah.
you can almost like want to be doing these incredible things as an individual person, but you still have to do it in line
Yeah.
with your spouse or with your kids. So, like along those lines, because a lot of our listeners are young, married, kids, like how do you begin to take what seems like a very individualistic mindset, but from a larger like scope, if you understand what I'm saying, when there's other people that are in this life with you making decisions and calendars, and like what's a starting point for somebody that might find themselves that they have other people depending upon them?
Yeah, listen, it depends on the relationship and kind of the what I'll call the it's going to sound wrong, the power kind of like dynamic that's between it. Like, look, with a child it's easy because the power dynamic is different, right? You're the parent. And so walking through a child with somebody, or let's say it's a colleague, or you're in a position where you're a leader in an organization. I mean, it's just a different kind of thing. With a spouse, it's just a challenge inside of that kind of thing. And what I'd say around that, and this has been true in my own life, is this commitment to that you just kind of described, which is the two become one. It starts with that. It starts with that powerful why. Like if that is the why, the two become one, then those two individuals are committed to being as one. And if there is that's in place, first of all, if it's not in place, work on that first. Work on that first. And then once it is in place, look, then they're interested. They're sharing these kinds of things. So, it really does start with, I think, that powerful why as to like why you're doing this, why you're in this marriage, why you're in this relationship. What is it about that's really, really critical? But it's hard. It's challenging.
Well, I was thinking about too something that you said earlier. Again, I've been in church most of my life, so a lot of my antidotes come with pastors. He said all of us as people have a plate, a shelf, and a garbage can. When you receive new information, if it's good to eat, put it on the plate,
Mm.
consume it, build your life, get the truth. if it's something you've never heard before, it's not evil. It's not outright
Mm,
like you know this is wrong, but you're not sure what to do with it. Put it on the shelf.
mm.
Come back to it another time. And if it's garbage, chuck it out.
Yeah.
And I think just even having that frame of reference, what you're describing is that if you know what your purpose is and you've gone through this entire exercise on paper and you've written down your priorities, your principles, your passions, you're now putting words to actual big, large themes of your life and it's becoming more in line. You're talking about your effort, you're talking about your failures. I got to imagine, because it's been my experience in my life, is that if I know what makes me come alive and I know my purpose, I know what doesn't serve my purpose. So when the world tries to throw information at me on the news, in the media, relationships, and it just doesn't resonate with the direction you're heading, it's much easier to shake those things off in life because you're able to proceed forward because it's not serving a purpose for you. What I think is hard is because most people haven't done these things that you described. Every day is drinking out of a fire hose
Yeah.
of anxiety. What should I be doing? This is COVID. All these things are happening all around me all the time. And I don't know if what I'm doing is what I should be doing as a parent. I don't know if I should be raising my kids different. I don't know if I'm a good friend. I don't know if I'm good at my job. And this will at least give you a foundation to come alive in a way that as new information or new experiences happen, kind of like Rachel talked about, it can allow you to have the emotional bandwidth to either affect you in a negative way, affect you in a positive way. But just even that concept of a plate, a shelf, and a garbage can give people permission to know that just because things are said to you or you receive information, you don't have to do anything with it.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, really, really powerful, and that is absolutely correct. There's another component inside the failure. I don't talk about this in the book, but share it with you here. It's been an important part of my life. Is that John Eldredge, who's written many, many books, Wild at Heart, one of my favorites. He
Mhm.
talks about this concept of the message of the arrows. Okay, and here's what the message of the arrows are: is that something happens and it's usually a fail of some form or another. And it's like it's an arrow that's shot right into your heart, right? That's what it feels like in the moment. And the question really for all of us is what's the message that we are taking from that arrow? Now, we have a couple choices there inside of there. We can say that the message of that arrow is I suck, right? I suck. And usually what that means is that we will make an agreement with ourselves to say this: I'll never do that again. I'll never do that again. And that's the message of the arrow. But what he proposes is this: is that in fact, what can be the message of the arrow is this: that thing was shot into my heart. And this is something that my heart actually really is made to be, that this is what makes me come alive, but there's a setback that I experience. And what I can take from that message of the arrows is okay, I get it. There's opposition here. There's opposition from keeping me from my strength. Okay. So for instance, somebody could be a lover, like they just are a lover. And then they put themselves out there and wham, they get shot right in the heart. And they say to themselves, I'll never do that again. I'll never go out on another date. I'll never put my heart out there again. Or they could be a great worker, or they could be an entrepreneur, and they could, wham, gets hit. I'll never do that again. And so they go back and they shrink back. That's what I call deadness. Honestly, that's what I'm trying to fight against. The inspiring, the aliveness is to say, no, wait a minute. Your heart, you're a lover, or you're an entrepreneur, and this is your strength. Now surround yourselves, learn from this, surround yourselves with others to blow into this so that you can really be alive inside what your strengths are. I mean, I've always loved that kind of concept, that like this message that we get and what we're doing with these arrows and these failures is so critical for how we treat our hearts. It's important.
Yeah. When I, with raising kids, my wife and I have the four. Each child has their own personality, their own
Yeah.
way of how God has wired them. And one of the challenges as a parent is how do you love them all equally, but as a father, as a mother, love them in a way that they respond to the world? Or, we sometimes forget that God has wired us all very differently. That's what brings us our uniqueness. And you can't be something that you weren't wired to be.
Yeah.
And even if this concept is hard to understand, when I talk to my kids, they're a huge fan of the Avengers and Marvel Comics. The reason the Avengers work is because everyone knows who the Hulk is. People know who Iron Man is. They all know the skills that they bring to the table. Sometimes we're trying to be a Hulk when we're not wired that way, and
Mm.
we get frustrated that we're not able to smash things in life. Part of, I think, what you are describing is almost such a practical, easy step that it's so easy to overlook. Sitting down with a piece of paper and really getting honest with yourself in going through getting the book, listening to this episode, getting your spouse involved, and getting down on paper, how am I wired as a person? What
Yeah.
makes me come alive? And it may not even be in what you do, but there could be an outlet that's out there waiting for you, that your career, like Rachel talked about, isn't what makes you a person, but maybe it's your career, like me, that gives you the ability to have a platform like this, which then feeds back into the things that I do every single day. And so for you, I love this idea today because I think there are a lot of people that are struggling. They've had family members, friends, bosses, colleagues, people that have told them what they are, what they're not, and they
Mhm.
have these identities in their mind. And we're trying to help people break through that. I think what attracted me to you, in a room full of 400 people, your heart was so prominent
Oh,
on your
thank you.
sleeve
Thank you.
that when you spoke, no one would have blamed you if you would have been arrogant and pompous, managing the kind of money that you did. But there was something about you that, as I listened, resonated with me to the degree of I want to be like that.
Mm.
I want to be in a room full of people. And I think coming alive on purpose, with purpose, um, I think it's so easy that at least when you start to do that, I got to imagine that there's unintended positive consequences to that. That when you start to come alive on purpose, you will intrinsically draw people to you that see the way that you are, and they'll be drawn to you as a magnet, that you're going to meet people in your life that on paper you don't even know right now. But it's so much more than just the purpose of what you've been called or created to do. It's all the extracurricular benefits that come with that, because our world is looking for hope. Our
Yeah.
world is looking for inspiration. We are looking for somebody to stand out from the crowd in a way that's meaningful, that when you see it, you go, man, I want my marriage to look like that. I want my career to look like that. I want to be the kind of dad Bret is. I want to have the kind of impact and influence. But it can't, the flip side is it can't be a measuring stick that makes me feel lesser than you because you're further along in your career. But learning how, through friendship, camaraderie, to build and realize, like I tell my kids and my family all the time, we're all links in a chain. And God has created us uniquely to discover this purpose. So I think this conversation is, so helpful today to help people understand that even if your story hasn't gone the way that you thought up until this moment, or you found yourself sighing on the freeway, just know that there's a Bret out there that's got a process that can actually help you maybe break free from some of this, negative thoughts that have, kind of been getting in the way, if you will.
Yeah. Listen, thank you so much for, for the honor of what you said about the impact that I had in that room on you. So thank you for that. I would not expected that to be the case, but I really appreciate it.
Yep.
In the book, I write this one. If you don't mind me sharing this story,
Go
it's
for
kind
it.
of an interesting one, I think. After I graduated college, as I said, I really didn't have financial means, but I did happen to be able to scrape aside a little bit of money, and I had some time before I started work. So I took a backpack trip to Europe for 6 weeks by myself. I took a backpack. A sleeping bag, which I knew I could sleep anywhere, basically, a Eurail pass, and a hitchhiker's thumb is the way I described it. And I went to Europe for 6 weeks. It so happened that one of my stops was in Florence, Italy. And, I'm not a big museum guy, but when you're in Europe, that's kind of one of the things that you do. And I happened to go to this one museum that was there in Florence. And inside this museum were works of Michelangelo. They were statues of Michelangelo, it turns out. In this one hallway, there are 4 blocks of marble that are called the prisoners. And the reason they're called the prisoners is that they are the unfinished works of Michelangelo. So one has a arm protruding out of it, and it's the perfect arm, but the rest of it is just this block of marble. And another one's got a torso, and there's these 4 things, and they're called the prisoners because they look like they are stuck. They're trying to get out from where they are, literally, and that's how it impacts you. And then as the curator has put this together, you turn this corner, and at the end of this long hallway, perfectly lit, is the David. And the David is unbelievable. I mean, it's 14 feet tall. It's just, it takes your breath away. And I mean, I was literally like just magnetized to it. And that's the impact that something like that, fully alive, can have. Years later, I thought about that whole curation. I thought, gosh, that feels like our lives. Like we start out as like blocks of marble, and then people come along, be they parents, be they coaches, be they teachers, be they whoever, who take chisels and help us come alive. But we feel like I do, like, that was a bad chip, or, oh, the marble is not as good as what it is, and that kind of stuff. But eventually, if we allow ourselves to, the full kind of splendor of what we can be on display, like the David. And when it is, man, is it attractive. It just draws people to you. And that's really what I'm talking about inside of, the Delta Theorem, is to try to figure out, maybe this is a tool, a chisel, to help to chip away at like unveiling that thing that you just know is what you're made for. It's what gives your life meaning and how you're going to have an impact. That's the kind of thing that I saw years later inside that layout, in Florence.
Well, we may not have both operated a family office. That may not bring us together, but I can say that I have also been to Florence, Italy. I went when I was in 9th grade, and I know what you are actually talking about. And I think that's a perfect analogy to bring kind of this Delta Theorem all the way home. Sometimes you have to experience the unbeautiful parts of life to appreciate beauty.
That's
If
right.
you just walked into that museum and saw the statue of David, it's breathtaking,
That's
but
right.
it's breathtaking for a moment because you have nothing to compare it to. I think if we're being honest, the only reason you're able to behold that as the final piece is because of the experience of seeing the 4 marble pieces and feeling like there's no hope. I mean, is this really all there is? And
I'm
you turn a
stuck. I'm a
corner and
prisoner.
yep.
Exactly. Yep.
And so if you find yourself as a listener to this show and life's dealt you some marble and you got an arm sticking out somewhere, part of your story's incomplete, just know the letter, the statue of David, it could be right around the corner.
That's right.
But are you putting in the effort to position yourself to see what could be coming down the road? And so don't be a prisoner that's just stuck from circumstance and failure. So I love this idea of the Delta Theorem. We are going to also bring the show to a close as we go through our stop, start, and continue. So I'm really excited to see what Bret has to go through with us.
This is the hardest part of this whole show, and I was prepared to think about this in advance. It turns out it's actually a little bit easier than I thought, because as I thought about it, I thought this: stop talking, start giving, and continue to trust. That's really what it kind of nails down for me. A lot of times talking is just intention. I talked about writing a book, and then I did it. Giving is what I said is this stage of my life. And it's easy to talk about giving. It's another thing to actually give of my time, my treasure, my talents, that part of it. And when I was looking at marketing the book, and I prayed about it, the one thing that I heard was trust me. And so that's the continue, is to just trust. And it's not just over a book. It's about my life. It's about others' life. Just trust me. Trust me. So stop talking, start giving, and continue to trust.
Well, and for episode 3 of the One Big Thing, talking about coming alive with purpose on purpose, I think that the natural maturation of these first 3 episodes, we couldn't have asked for any better leading up to this point, to give people the mental space, the ability to think through what all of you have guests have brought, which is all very different to the table. So Bret, I am very appreciative that even in my life, that small, still voice of trust me doesn't always make sense. It doesn't always feel good. And I think that's the point is faith, whether you believe in what Bret and I have talked about or just whatever may be driving you in your life. There's a difference between feelings, emotions, what we're going through, and sometimes the most challenging situations in my life that scream at you. There's been a small, still voice that tells me, trust me and keep going. If this episode 3 can be that for you today, I would encourage all of you guys, please head out, check out the show notes. I'll have contact information for Bret if you want to send him an email or a message. We'll have a link to his Amazon book. Please go out, show him some love, get a copy of it. Because again, the whole point of this show is to give you practical insights. In this Delta Theorem, there's no math involved, but it's a framework that if my heart and my passion, Bret, is not just so that I come alive, but I'd love for my wife and I to come alive together.
Yes.
Because if we come alive together, then my children will come alive.
That's
and
right.
If our family comes alive, you are going to change the world.
That's right.
And so there are layers to this thing. Start with yourself, get your spouse involved, use this book as a guiding principle, but know that it's going to take you effort. So Bret, I appreciate you stopping by the One Big Thing podcast studio. Thanks as always for giving us a chance and speaking to our listeners. And we just appreciate you being here.
It's been great. Thank you for the honor of having me on.